The fact that they tried to imprison me on 9 occasions, take my home off me and put one of my children in the care system. I located and identified 10 children in 10 minutes once. In a short period of time afterwards, them two girls both died in mysterious circumstances. You know, and the reason they don't look into it is because anyone who does gets attacked.
Hi everybody, and welcome to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a gentleman you may have heard on. He started doing all the big podcasts. He was on Heretics the other week. And it's John Wedger, a former detective from the London Police, the Metropolitan Police. Thank you, John, for coming on today.
My pleasure, Nick. My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're a gent I've been wanting to speak to now for a good 6 months, if not longer. From the first time I saw you on YouTube talking to someone, it was like, there's a man I want to talk to about London, about the potential grooming gangs in London. Just for you and for the audience, I've got 2 decades of experience tackling the grooming gangs and more broadly, child sexual exploitation. I've stopped half a dozen children being raped and abused. With a charity I set up, I've won national awards on this work. But all the all the scumbags I've had arrested and prosecuted have all been white males, because this isn't just one community, one ethnicity. Child sexual exploitation happens in every group, in every community, and we need to get a grip on that. But when we talk about the grooming gangs, especially in Greater Manchester, in Rochdale, in Oldham, it's been around the Pakistani Muslim community. And that's always led me to think, what about London? Why don't we ever hear anything about London? Is it because it's too diverse, it doesn't happen? Or is it so diverse, the information never gets out? Is it covered up like it's been in Greater Manchester for decades and decades? For a police officer working on the ground in London, detective as well, what's going on in London?
Isn't it ironic that in you doing the benevolent work of protecting children, you get given national awards? The police's response to my efforts was the fact that they tried to imprison me on 9 occasions, take my home off me and put one of my children in the care system. You know, this is what we're up against, and I work for the police. You know, you're saying there about 6 children. Let me tell you something. The problem is that bad in London. I located and identified 10 children in 10 minutes once. It's that big. It's something that I've been campaigning, shouting about for 2 decades, 10 within the police and 10 outside of it. And it's only now that the national media actually has picked up the mantle and been brave enough to sort of listen to people like myself. I'm not alone. I'm not reinventing any wheel. But all we ever hear is Pakistani, Kashmiri, Pakistani, cab drivers, Kashmiri. Wow, how short-sighted, how naive. Yet you've only got to look at the media and see things such as Elm Guest House, Dolphin Square, things that have been going on an industrial scale. How many of them involve Pakistanis and Kashmiri cab drivers? I'll tell you now, like the European Minister for Poland, 0. You know, and the reason they don't look into it is because anyone who does gets attacked. And I was threatened by a senior officer who was in charge of dealing with vice for the Met Police, that if you carry on looking into this, you will lose your home, your job and your children. You must shut the F up. Right? Grooming gangs is a very chic, on vogue term. It's child prostitution. Let's call it what it is. It is, you know, people pimping out children for sex, and it's gone on for centuries. And the police have known about it for a long time. The Metropolitan Police knew about it so much that they brought in the Street Offences Act in 1953, I think it was, you know, to protect children that are at risk of this. They had the Vice Unit that had the Street Offences team that actually went out there to deliberately try and find children involved in this. So it's been going on, and they knew about it, and they have.
Please excuse this interruption. Anglophobia. Why do they hate us? Is it jealousy, envy?
What we got to look at, Nick, is that crime goes by patterns. You can predict crime trends, and you can target certain areas. And it's usually impoverished areas. And in respect to that, we can say that there is a clear correlation between, one second, just bear with me 1 second, Nick, 1 second. We can predict crime, and we can say that the poverty and crime are bedfellows, but not where it comes to crimes against children, offending against children. We don't. And we've got to look at human psychology. We've got to look at why. There's always got, and the question is never asked why. Why? Right? Human beings, we're made up, if we look at this on a holistic level, we're built up of three parts: the intellectual self, the physical self, and the emotional self. So intellectually, if a child is abused, they can go on to attain greatness, right? In respect to their careers, commerce, whatever it might be, right? And sometimes there's a need to overexert yourself, to show the world you are something, you are not nothing, you will not be silenced anymore. Like, you have a voice. I'm not a little mouse, I'm a roaring lion. And you'll see this replicated in their people's drive to obtain things they never had. And people that have grown up in poverty, there's a need that to surround themselves with glittery things because they've been poor, and it doesn't taste nice. They like the fruits of opulence. Physically, if you sexually abuse a child, you hurt a child, they can grow up to be monsters. They can grow up to really fortify and edify themselves physically. And we see that when people join these very tough regiments, in the British military. We see that with professional fighters. And if you listen to many testimonies, it's the same thing. I grew up with kids' home. I was abused. Many of these soldiers from these elite regiments have gone on to podcasts to say exactly that. And of course they will say exactly that because it is the truth. I've been hurt. I know no one will ever hurt me. And also go through such, torturous, physical tests. There has to be something that drives you, because anyone really that hasn't come from that, there is no need to put yourself through that. Why would you do that? But it's like, I felt pain. No one will ever hurt me. This isn't pain. I've had pain as a child. The world will know pain, when I get big. So you get that. So people can go on to achieve and overachieve if they've been sexually abused on an intellectual and a physical level. But let's not miss out the third part of this, the trilogy of this, right? The three balls of the snowman, as it were, the emotional self. You abuse someone, that emotional clock stops. It stops. And unless that person gets therapy, recognize what's gone on with them, and they're able to overcome it and therapize themselves or with the help of others, they will remain emotionally broken for the rest of their entire life. And most people who abuse have been abused. They have. I'm in no way saying that victims are abusers. No. But the propensity in that community is far, far greater. And social services know that a woman who's subject as to child of sexual abuse, she's at greater risk of failing to protect her child. Right. And these are things that are fact. And it's a conversation no one wants. It's a conversation we would have. And then there's a damage, there's a brokenness, there's an unreasonable element to them. So you will get a petulance in that person. And I'm not rubbishing them, because I stand up for survivors. And I do. And I want them to get justice, because the system has failed them. And there's many reasons. And this is what needs to be discussed. But there's a brokenness in there. Okay. And that brokenness doesn't know any boundaries whatsoever. Right. So crime, when it comes to dishonesty and disorder, which is the majority of what police officers deal with, especially on a patrol level basis, you don't get that with sex crime. It is like the hot knife through society, through the butter of society. You'll get pedophiles, right? And I know YouTube doesn't like it, PDF files or whatever they want to call it, right? The newest one I've heard is Friends of the Playgrounds, which I sort of, well, I can go along with that one. You will find them in the Christian community, in the Islamic community, in the Jewish community, in the atheistic community. You will find them in the upper classes, the middle classes, the ruling classes, the lower classes. Boom, 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 boom. And this is the glue that cements these people together. It is a dirty little secret. And it has a massive blackmail value, right? So that broken sexuality, like you see everywhere. When I was working on Vice, the dedicated unit the Metropolitan Police had, the premier police force of the world, the one that is a benchmark really for all that is decent in the policing world, supposedly. Like they know all about this. Like they knew the power it had. And when we started seeing these revelations coming out publicly in these many inquiries that they have, this is why, in my opinion, we should never have another inquiry. You can stick them straight up your hole, as far as I'm concerned. Kemi Batanoff and all the other shadow and acting ministerial influences that we have, because it has achieved nothing. We need a national crime squad led police investigation, not an inquiry, because an inquiry will inquire. The last one we had, which was the ICSA, the IICSA inquiry, of which I provided the largest non-victim statement. The largest one. Mine was 52 pages, fully comprehensive of what was going on in London. We had a representative from your part of the world, Manchester, and they were quite happy to turn around and say Pakistani, Pakistani, Pakistani. They didn't ever put out any information of my statement. I gave such a comprehensive and again, this isn't Radio John Wedger, although gospel according to John Wedger. It's not that. It's not about my ego and who I want. I've always been the underdog here, and I don't care. I'm really not about that, about me or what I say. But for once, it has got influences getting listened to, right? Justice Jay suppressed it all. Out of the 20 recommendations, 5 of them came from my evidence. Right, London is one of the biggest cities in the Western world. Right, it is the most diverse city, bar none, in the world. Okay, 80% of all of serious organised crime in the UK goes on in and around London. And to say there are no grooming gangs is a load of bollocks. And it always has been. The Commissioner of Police knows it's bollocks. The Mayor of London knows it's bollocks, right? So, and we can't make this a red or a blue issue. We've just got Kemi Batanoff recently saying we're going to expose this. No, we're not. Let's look back in history. Let's look back at former governments. When we had a Home Secretary called Leon Britton, who was accused many times of abuse against kids. He was handed 53 files, right, by the MP Tom Watson. He hid them. Theresa May was handed 144 files of serious child sexual abuse, which some of which included ministerial people. She again hid them. So the Blues aren't going to do anything about this, just as much as the Reds aren't. What we will see on a political level is there is a greater amount of propensity of abuse in left-wing constituencies, right, in regards to care homes, because that's due to equality laws. And that goes back to the 1970s, when local authorities refused deliberately to do proper vetting on homosexual applicants for residential care placements in these care homes. Now, I'm no way denigrating homosexuals. I would not do that. But what I'm saying is once one paedophilic homosexual gets into these kids' homes, it's not going to be long before the rest of the mafia gets in there as well. And that was proved in the findings of the Shirley Oaks care home, that throughout the 50s, 60s and 70s, they had at one point 19 known or convicted paedophiles working in their care home, male ones. Prior to that, it was a lot of women were abusing, and that was because of the abuse that went on due to the trauma of war. Okay, and there weren't many men about. So there is a history, and there's an algorithm to everything. We've had these gangs always predating on kids. We've had them in ecclesiastical settings. We've had them in governmental settings, such as reform schools. If you look in the northeast of England, from the 80s, for the next 20 years, from the early 80s, 1983 onwards, there was a home called Medhamsley for maladjusted young men. Thousands of men were sexually abused there, and it was government run. And the head of it was a man called Neville Husband, who was actually known to make child pornography, and the establishment ignored it. Right, the government have a thing called a D notice. A D notice is it's a terminology which its full title was a defence notice. So when people started speaking out about the abuse that went on in Dolphin Square, that the parliamentary residence, where posh parties went on, where young men were abused, and there was even allegations of murder there, and Elm Guest House, where 1.3 MPs signed in to go and abuse children, those who spoke out were issued with D notices, defence notice. The police can't do that. Defence of the realm. It's the intelligence services, the MIs, the military intelligence of 5 and 6. They're the ones whose legal teams serve D notices on victims and those that have got any evidential worth, because it's got huge blackmail value. And in order for the intelligence services to operate, it needs to have three things. It's got to have some sort of disturbance to the health welfare of the UK, the financial welfare of the UK, or the political welfare of the UK. Now, nothing is more politically unstable than to be blackmailed because you are, a friend of the playground. And we have had ministers, and we have had even the head of our intelligence services, right? He was involved in it. We've had advisors, political advisors to 5 consecutive prime ministers that have even been known of or accused of or convicted of paedophilic activity, right? It's huge, influential thing. And are they not grooming gangs? When kids' homes take young kids and drop them off, right, even to places like Ted Heath's personal residence, is that not a grooming gang? Was Ted Heath a Kashmiri cab driver? I don't think so. It's been going on and on and on. And the reason you don't hear about London, because people like me that stand up and investigate it, well, we found 10 kids in 10 minutes, 52 kids in 3 days. Right? That's one example. There was another example that was even more extensive. And then when I put the findings towards my superiors, and I start then giving information of the clientele, which range from crack houses, those who run crack houses, by far, if we want to talk about ethnic groups, by far the biggest ethnic group that was pimping out kids when I was dealing with it were Jamaicans. When do we hear about Jamaicans doing that? I'm not denigrating Jamaicans. I grew up with Jamaicans. Jamaican yardies, men of violence from the Jamaican underworld, were pimping out kids more than any other ethnic group. The Albanians were doing it, right? There was a woman doing it. A woman. There was a police officer. There was a police sergeant involved in this. There was a judge involved in this. There was Lithuanians. There were Polish. There were Irish. I can go on and on. There were gangsters. The second to the Jamaican gangsters were the gangsters, the London gangsters, were involved in this. And I think if you really, really did an honest insight into the nefarious activities of the Cray twins, which everyone seems to revere, respect, and love, you'll find out the secret of their success was probably down to young boys. And I'm not afraid to say that. And I've been threatened by their family, and I don't care. I don't care for these people. They hold nothing on me. The fear is for the children, not for me. But I've been threatened by the biggest and the best of them, and that goes right up to the head of our government. Right? I had a very brave cabinet minister called Sir Mike Penning stand by me. And he took my fight right to the heart of government. I went before the Home Secretary's team, right, who reported instantly to Theresa May. And I gave a full and frank synopsis of what was going on. The next day, he was removed from his post and told to stay away from John Wedgett because he's trouble. But they would happily carry on with the narrative that it was the cab drivers in Rochdale, Rotherham, Burnley, Luton, Reading, and all that. Yeah, that went on. They should hang for what they've done because they destroy souls. When you do this to a kid, you rip out their soul. But they don't want to go near London. But do you know what? For once, that dam has now burst and it is leaching out. They won't be able to stop this. They will not be able to stop this. The reason it don't come out in London is because they bully anyone who looks into it and because it causes so much problems. I've had people come to me and I've supported people. I've supported gangsters. People have been inside for crimes against humanity. Crimes of extreme violence. One of the most notorious gangsters in the UK came to me, and he opened his heart while he went through. And the reason he went to the heights of notoriety for being a crook and a gangster was he was severely abused at the kids' home. The most prolific armed robber in the UK came to me because of what they did to him in the kids' home. They weren't Kashmiri cab drivers. None of them were, right? I've also now had a group come to me, and the group includes a bloke called Charles Spencer, whose sister is Diana Spencer, right? These guys were abused in an identical fashion to the kids from the care homes on the streets, right? Right, these boys went to Eton, they went to Winchester, they went to Radley College, they went to all the big fee-paying schools. They're just as broken and emotionally damaged as the gangsters. Were any of them cab drivers? No, they weren't. Well, what happens then? Was it not grooming? Of course it was grooming. And let me give you an example, Nick, of how this works, right? So Scotland has just concluded their inquiry of what went on in Scotland. They were a couple of years behind England. Scotland has a very different attitude towards this. It's abhorrent in Scotland, but Scotland, in England, there is this lust to stick kids in care homes. The Scottish are a bit more reluctant. They're one of the last countries in Europe to implement a kids' home environment. They would rather put the kids in prison with the adults than they would put them in a home, because they knew their place was with their parents. So there's quite a benevolence in Scotland in that respect. But throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they were just taking kids into care for absolutely no reason. And they classed it as respite care. And they started preying on the poor communities of the West Coast, the Strathclyde regions, you know. And they started picking on girls as well as boys, but girls for this example I'm going to use. And these girls from toddler age upwards were shoved into a care home many, many miles away from the residence. They were sent to rural Perthshire. But England is the second most densely populated country in Europe. I think second to Monaco. I think Monaco, Malta, and England. So it might be second or third anyway. Scotland is the second least densely populated country. There's hardly anyone lives there if you look at it. And anyway, they put them in this care home called Fornethi in the middle of Perthshire, and the headmistress has just been convicted of abuse against young girls. And these girls, from the moment they went in there, they were beaten, they were whipped, they were belted. They'd done nothing wrong. And at night, they were taken to big posh houses and they were raped. And one girl contacted me, a woman now, suffering from alcoholism, broken marriages, drug addiction, all as a result of emotional brokenness and an anger and a frustration at the lack of justice. Because in order for healing to commence, you need justice, right? Need justice, but nothing was coming their way, Scottish. Like London, stump. Provincial English towns, yeah, we're with you all the way, because you're dealing with the old Kashmiri and the cab drivers and all that. But rural Scotland and London, nothing. And I'll sort of give you an insight as to why. And this scenario really, really does highlight it. It's a good education, really. Now, these girls, during the day, a man would come round and he'd point out in the classroom different girls. And these girls never knew why. And that night, someone came in and took the ones that were indicated during the day out. And they remembered the man who picked them out. And they remember being taken to this castle type place. And one of the things abuse survivors remember are triggers, smells. Smells really do trigger a survivor. And this woman said, you'll find a lot of these girls that they will have an abhorrence for pipe tobacco. Because all these men were very posh, very white, and often smoked pipes or smelt whiskey. And they'd be sat around in a big palatial setting, and these girls are brought in and they were abused something rotten. 20 of these girls were interviewed when they were women. 15 of them picked one person out. One person, they said he was the main one. And he was a man called Lord Nicholas Fairbairn. Nicholas Fairbairn. Okay, we hear about all these others. Have we ever heard of Nicholas Fairbairn? I bet you haven't.
No.
Nicholas Fairbairn was the advocate depute for Scotland. The advocate depute means he's sort of on the level of the Home Secretary. He's in charge of the whole justice system for Scotland. We have the Crown Prosecution Service. In Scotland, they have the Procurator Fiscal, right? Procurator Fiscal, okay? And the PF, as they call it in Scotland. That is your prosecutor, okay? He's the adjudicator, what goes to the courts, what doesn't. So Lord Nicholas Fairbairn was in charge of that. Lord Nicholas Fairbairn was Margaret Thatcher's most liked lord. It's classed as an eccentric. He had something like the UK's largest whiskey collection, and he would turn up in Parliament and vote with a kilt on and all this. He was such a character, such a laugh, you know. His best friend was a man called Bob Henderson, aka Dirty Bob. Bob Henderson was later on suspected to be involved in a rent boy racket in Edinburgh, where a rent boy was murdered. Bob Henderson even let his daughter out to Nicholas Fairbairn, who he raped. His best mate, he watched while his best mate raped his. Nicholas Fairbairn, the head of the judicial system. All of this is public domain. You will not get prosecuted for me saying this. I give you my word. Nicholas Fairbairn had a long-standing girlfriend, a bit of an open secret, and her name was Esther Ranson. Now, that is a name you would have heard of.
Yep.
And Esther Ranson opened the largest kids charity ever in the UK called Childline. Childline, if you're being abused, ring Childline. Not 999, which is easy and you don't have to pay for. You got to ring 0800 111 222 555, whatever it was. It was something like an 11, 12-digit number, which you'd have to pay for if you had one of them old locks on the phone. 999, no, you wouldn't, would you know? When I was a detective, not just in vice, but in child protection, when I was a detective in there, we would get referrals would come on from all different agencies. They'd come from schools, they'd come from social workers, they'd come from all over the place. One, when all the years I did in child protection in London's busiest borough, one of the most impoverished parts of London and the UK, we got one from Childline. Where did all the other thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, where did they go? Is there not a connection between Esther Ranson, God rot her soul if she's not already dead, you know, and her boyfriend, advocate depute Lord Nicholas Fairbairn, in charge of the justice system of Scotland? Did no one ever do anything about this? Of course they didn't, because it was politically influential. And then we had our own Home Secretary who was known to be involved in it. I got given the names of 2 police officers, and they were allowed to retire early. They were made to retire early, and they were the parliamentary protection officers for a prime minister called Sir Ted Heath. Sir Ted Heath, who took the UK into Europe.
Yeah.
3 times a week when he was in residence at number 10, 3 times a week, taxis would pull up and young boys from care homes would be delivered in. And they'd get taken past security and they had to walk past these 2 armed, uniformed protection officers. They knew what was going on. And they decided one day, we're not having this anymore. This is stopping. But they knew, unlike me, that if they went to the superior, they'd be silenced, they'd be moved on. I was naive. I was stupid. I thought my superiors would do something about it, you know. But no, they didn't. Right? They knew what would happen. And they knew if they told anyone it would happen. So they decided to deal with it in-house. So they actually fronted Ted Heath and said, you know what, we know what's going on. It stops, and it stops now. Ted Heath said, okay, gentlemen, yeah, I understand. For that week, no boys were delivered. Boys were spared the humiliation and the torture of what they were going to go through. Kids that were in care homes as a place of safety, you know. And the cab drivers knew what was going on. And so did the rest of the police staff, and they said nothing. Right. But then within days, weeks, them boys were pensioned off, never be seen again. Who wrote off their pensions? Who made that decision? Where was the memo, you know, that was passed down the food chain to allow them men to walk away? You know, so this is why it don't go on in London. This is why. I went on the streets with the journalists the other month, And within 90 minutes, we found a 14-year-old girl. Within 90 minutes. You know, by the end of the evening, the 4 kids were identified, was working on the streets. When we spoke to the street workers and said, you know, where were the police? They said, no, they're never here, never here. One of them picked out a punter. She said, look, that's one of the punters. One of the punters who picks up young girls, a black taxi driver. One of the Knights of the Road, licensed by the carriage office, you know, and everything else. So it's flabbergasting. It's mind blowing what's gone on. And when I was removed from post for the next 7 years, no one was officially appointed in London. No one. Bear in mind, on an unofficial level, the unit that was looking out for these kids, there was 2 of us. Not like Greater Manchester, who had operation. I can't remember the name of the operation in Manchester. There was a big team up there dealing with this, dealing with the 3 girls. A big team. I'm not decrying them. Good on them. London, we never had that. There was me and a female colleague. We were both overworked. We were on the point of alcoholism, right? Because we were drinking and we were, you know, we were tearing our hair out, you know, what's going on. And the moment I mentioned it to my superiors, that the fact there was a police officer and a judge involved, the whole unit was shut down. It was scaled down from 36 girls. No, there was boys as well. There's nothing we don't hear about in the North. We never hear about boys. We are boys. You know, there was one boy, he was so advanced in the condition of AIDS, a young teenage boy in a kid's home, that when the punters would send a taxi, minicab to pick him up, he was so ill, sometimes he had to be carried into that taxi to be off to be raped. He had open sores on his rectum, on his anal tract, open sores. No one stopped him. No one got in the way and said, this ain't happening. No one. But the moment I did, I was threatened with the loss of my home, my job, and my children. The whole unit was shut down. The amount of girls was reduced down to 2. And, you know, in a short period of time afterwards, them two girls both died in mysterious circumstances.
Wow.
Like, have you heard about that? No, of course not. None of you would have done. All right. The newspapers only wanted me because I at the same time was speaking out, the same time Maggie Oliver was, and they pursued her narrative. They said to me, how many of them were Pakistanis? I said, none. And so they didn't want to hear me. I went and sat down for a whole afternoon with the head of current affairs, a man called Tom Simons, at BBC Broadcasting House, and laid everything on the table. I even named a politician to him. And his response was, his retort was, it's not newsworthy. Yet, just before Christmas, when Kemi Badenoch had her open session in Parliament, what they're going to do to deal with this problem, Tom Simons was there giving his opinion on how this should be dealt with. He knew about it 8 years ago. He did nothing. So I don't listen to any of this rubbish anymore. You know, this could stop, and this could have stopped a long time ago. You know, whatever happens in the North, I reckon you can times it by 10 down there.
Let me ask you this. We've probably only got a few minutes left. You've painted a hell of a picture. I thought I knew what was going on, and you've blown my mind. And it's extremely dark, what the picture you've just painted. What can we do? I know what needs to be done, but what can we do?
Well, firstly, my narrative could be used to be pushed out there for one, and it totally goes against the narrative that we're getting all the time. You know, and again, I'm not detracting it away from that these Muslim guys are doing it. Yeah, they are, but they've all done it. It's not confined to them. They've not got monopoly on this. So we've got to break that myth in a heartbeat as well, right? And we've got to make our politicians put pressure on police forces. The child protection is number one priority. It is number one priority. And the other thing is, we've got to stop taking a reactive response to this. The police only ever have a reactive response. They call it fire brigade policing. There was one chief constable from some inept northern force who say, no, we don't have none of that because none of it presents itself. Oh, seriously? You tosser. How will this ever present itself? This criminality never, ever presents itself. Never. The only way it presents itself is by the junkie outside Tesco's begging. the kid screaming in a classroom, the little boy who defecates himself before a PE lesson. That's where it presents itself. We need to educate our teachers into what child abuse really is and how it manifests itself. I part of my talk, I go on about abuse of young men. We don't hear this with the northern narrative. We never hear it. We hear the white girls end of. Let me tell you something. If you ignore this problem, you're condemning souls. And also, with the northern counsellors, the Muslim and Pakistani counsellors who deem this as some sort of race targeting, let me tell you something, and I want to direct it straight at them, and more so at Sadiq Khan. You ignore what these Pakistani boys are doing. Now, I know what goes on in the South, and it's not predominantly Pakistani, but I'm just saying this, right? You ignore it. These men who are having sex with these young white girls, they're paedophiles. Paedophiles are not homosexual. They are not bisexual. They are what we used to term trisexual. They will try anything. They would, if they're shagging young white girls, they'll be shagging their own girls from their own community. So if you ignore this, you're condemning your own ethnic group, your own brethren. You're condemning them. You're ignoring them as well. So we need to educate everyone, NGO, all these outreach groups, whatever they might be that deal with kids, on what child protection really is. And we need to be proactive. The majority of them, this isn't like some sort of Liam Neeson Tekken film where there's young girls being paraded underneath a railway arch in King's Cross. It's absolute bullshit that don't exist. They're picked up from children's homes, from kids' homes. That's where they're picked up. And let me tell you something about child abuse. We might go on about kids' homes, but 80%, a big fat 80% of all children raped, they're raped at home by people who know them. That's where it goes on. 80% of our prison population come from abuse. Majority sexual abuse. It is a single most destructive element in our society. Everything else is just picking up pieces of shattered lives. We need to deal with this at its source. And it's the police, and the police's only job to deal with this. Good on vigilante groups such as paedophile hunters, but unfortunately, they're only picking the low-hanging fruit. They're not going to get anywhere near to the serious and organised criminality that really is child trafficking, child grooming. Because with that, you need sophisticated covert techniques and Home Office authorities to do it. Because if you go outside of that, it's illegal, you know?
John, that's so dark. It really, I mean, I've learned a lot speaking to you today, even though I've been involved for 2 decades. Everything you said makes sense. And I think part of what you're saying is, if we can solve this one issue, if we can stop the next generation of young people being abused, that in a decade from now reduces the amount of social problems we're going to have, because we haven't got the next generation of broken children that turn into broken adults who then repeat the cycle. You know, some of them will go into crime, some of them will be, as you said, will be fine in life, but some of them won't. And I never realized, I've never heard anyone talk about it the way you just spoke about it there. It's a huge issue. And like you, I can't see how the government ever gets a grip of this, especially the 2 main parties, because it'll open too many cans of worms. They won't know what's going to come out of those cans when they start digging.
Well, they've no idea who's involved. I mean, look, let's just take it back to its inception, right? 80% of prison population comes from child abuse. Now that, you know, that forms emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual, okay? And again, it goes back to what I said earlier about the emotionally damaged person. And they end up with an inability to reason, right? So they will then flip straight away to anger. And anger is trauma. It's the only thing anger is trauma. So if we start recognizing angry young children, you know they've come from trauma. And when you speak to survivors, you say, what could have been done? They said, if only a teacher would have took me to one side and said, what's wrong? What's going on? What's up? You know, who's done this to you? What's happened? What's happened? Simple, open question. You know, the basic premise of child protection, anyone involved with kids should be aware of safeguarding. But also, they should be vetting people to a very strong level that are working with kids. And I say that should involve psychometric testing. When we've had politicians that have gone on exposed to be perverts, how has that happened? How? If you look back, in the 1970s, the Labour government had a group that annexed themselves to them, right? And that the acronym was called PI, Paedophile Information Net Exchange, right? And there was a group of pro paedophiles, to be honest, that had got in there. One of the guys that was one of the founder members, he worked in a posh public school. I think his name was Sir Peter Wrighton. He actually went on to write the doctrine, the manual for kids in care. It went on to become the Bible for social workers. Only up until recently, he was a monumental pervert and had been caught out many times for being a pervert. Him and his ilk-minded nonsense went on to set up PI. The Labour government patronised them. 3 women MPs, Patricia Hewitt, Margaret Hodge and Harriet Harman, went on to back this group. Harriet Harman herself wanted the age of consent between a grown man and a child to be 14. And I think it was either Hodge or Hewitt, Tony Blair appointed as Minister for Children. I mean, my word, listen, people need to get this into their heads, how long ago this has been going on. And you only got to see the debacle that is the BBC. I mean, how are they still going? I'll never, ever know. And then they self-adjudicate. So you've got Dame Janet Smith was put in charge and her findings were there's nothing to see. Let's move on. Absolute bollock. Again, I keep using that vernacularism, but it is. And they expect us to believe it. How many adults would have been sat at home or in a pub after work and seen Savile, even when he was knighted, and gone out and topped themselves? How many people who commit suicide have come from child abuse because of the lack of injustice? How many parents are too frightened to bathe their own children because they think there's an innate ability to become a paedophile themselves and have gone on to harm themselves because they think that that's what might happen? How many men and women that are domestically violent come from child abuse? I'll tell you how many, all of them. How much alcoholism, how much of an effed up society we got because someone has decided to put their knob in a kid. Well, I'll tell you what's majority of it. So what you just said there, you're right. If we solve child abuse, we could, in effect, empty the prisons to a degree of 80%, couldn't we? We could. Will they do it? Will the hell no. But also, child abuse goes on for the next 3 generations. And that has been cited in social services doctrines. It's been cited legally. And it's also been cited biblically. It biblically says you shouldn't do it. No religion allows this. I don't care what they say about Islam and all that. No one allows this. They know. Even any Islamic scholar will know, anyone with half a brain, that if you do that to a child, you're going to ruin them physically, psychologically, mentally. They know that. There must be lots of Muslims that are just appalled at what people of their religion have done. They must be disgusted to their high teeth. But unfortunately, you get the others that the ignorant jump on the ball and think they all do it. Of course they don't. There was anthropological studies done on this topic. And do you know the finding? They found there's not one community on this planet that allows it. Not one. Right? They even found that indigenous cultures from the foothills, of Papua New Guinea in the jungle regions there, all the way out to the Amazon basin, if they catch anyone fiddling a kid, they banish them to the jungle for 2 summers. In effect, kill them because they'll die on your own out there. So no one allows it. So why do we allow it? Why are we allowed politicians to get away with it and walk free? Why are we allowed chief constables not to prosecute? Why? Where is the outrage? This is what gets me. Where is the outrage? I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was this woman and she gets caught on CCTV cameras. She's walking on the street and there's a wheelie bin. And on top of the wheelie bin...
And the cat. Yep, I remember.
She had to be relocated because they were going to kill her. You know, I worked um, with sexual abuse, sex crime that for a long time in the police. I was a detective on the vice squads. I worked on a juvenile protection unit. I worked with the National Crime Agency on this. I tracked down paedophiles, and I did two tours of duties on two separate child protection units in the roughest parts of London, and I mean the roughest parts of London, and I sort of get a bit of an idea of what it does to people. My main experience has come my campaigning that I do now. I can walk down the streets of London and people will stop and hug me. But apart from the schizophrenic who thinks I work for the intelligence services, you get that every now and then, you get the Fruit Loop. But on the whole, the other day I was walking through central London, and a dust cart stopped, and a Rastafarian shouted at me, "Don't you move." I didn't know what I'd done wrong. I thought, Mike, come over. And he just picked me up and he lifted me up and he went, whispered in my ears, "I was one of them boys in the kids' home. Don't ever stop fighting for us." They need a voice. When I was working with the street prostitutes, I'm not on about the brothels. It's a different game. That's an economic issue. I've got no interest in that. But the girls on the street, I had a bit of a heart for them. Everyone had been sexually abused in the care system. Everyone. They were all lesbians. And I couldn't work out how. And I used to say, how can you be a lesbian if you're in your business is the sex servicing of men? And they say men hurt us. John, men hurt us. And so it made me understand sexuality. It made me understand violence. It made me 100% understand one thing, which was the biggest bugbear of policing, and that were heroin addicts. Skagheads, smackheads, brownheads, whatever you call them, were robbing the inner cities blind, causing chaos. Shops were going out of business because of them. Most of them had been sexually abused. And I sat down with one once. He was the same age as me. And I went, I was so naive. I didn't understand this. And I was a snob because I lived in this police environment. And a lot of coppers marry coppers, and they end up in this police middle classy ghetto, and they don't really understand people suffering. The police need to be educated. Coming back to your earlier point, police, get me in there. I'll educate them. I'll tell them what the score is. And you know what? I'm an orator, and they will listen to me, but they won't go nowhere near me because I'm a bit dangerous, in that respect. And I said to this guy, why are you taking heroin? What's all that about? That's madness. It's going to kill you. AIDS was being transmitted through the needles. There weren't any needle exchanges. They would have these awful abscesses on their bodies. It was horrific. And he said, I was brought up in a kids' home. And I just thought kids in kids' homes, they actually have a bit of a good life, to be honest. No one tells them what to do. And I thought it'd be all right. He went, no, I was raped. And I couldn't get it into my head. I went, what? What do you mean? He goes, I was bummed. I went, how old? He said, 8. And I think, how does that even work? I couldn't understand how that would even work. And then he went, every time I inject myself with heroin, that memory, that taste, that feeling, that abhorrence, it goes. And he said, and for that minute, I'll float wrapped in a duvet on a cloud of cotton wool on my way to heaven for that minute. And then bang, I'm back down. And you know what? He weren't a dirty smackhead anymore. He weren't a vile, thieving piece of nothing anymore. He had a special place in my heart. I don't even know if that guy's still alive, but I thank him. He gave me an education more than the police ever gave me. The police threatened me. Can you imagine a senior officer telling another copper not to look into this? And I suffered because I was arrested 9 times. There were 9 files put to the CPS to prosecute me, and they tried to take one of my children into care. That's what I went through. That's what I suffered to speak out for this. I then went on. All the cases were thrown out. The CPS weren't going. And I told the Commissioner of Police, a woman called Cressida Dick, who I think is the most abhorrent woman. She shouldn't be a dame. And her predecessor, Lord Hogan Howe, who has been put in charge of child protection matters. Man, this man shouldn't even be put in charge of public toilets. They're wrong-uns, in my opinion. They knew about this and they chose to do that. 0. Every single one of them. I told Cresta Dip what was going on. I told her. And she did nothing, absolutely nothing. They didn't appoint from my being booted off the unit for the next 7 years. They never appointed a dedicated officer to deal with this. Can you imagine a capital city that had no dedicated officers dealing with child prostitution until they were shamed by the likes of Jimmy Savile? And what happened was that I was threatened with the loss of my home and jobs and kids. I suffered a 4-year campaign really to imprison me, to shut me up. And then Jimmy Savile thing occurred. And then, of course, it came out what was going on with the grooming gangs in Manchester and what Maggie was doing there. And I linked in with her and Simon Dantrick, the MP that you had up there, who did a lot of good work and things like that. But they weren't the ones who really made it different for me. At the same time, there was a kids' home scandal in Jersey called Haute de la Garenne, in which this officer by the name of Lenny Harper, a very, very senior detective, was taken from Strathclyde Police, a tough street working copper. This guy, again, he holds a big place in my heart, Lenny Harper. And if he ever sees this, I want to tell him now, you're a good man. He deserves a knighthood, Lenny Harper. But again, I don't know if you've ever heard of Lenny Harper. And my question, and it's not criticism, Nick, it's not, why? Why don't you know Lenny Harper? The guy is a stone bonkers hero when it comes to child protection. He's the daddy. Lenny Harper got sent out there because of this kids' home, because kids were being sent on an industrial level from the United Mainland Kingdom to this little principality shoved off the Normandy coast, one of the wealthiest bits of square acreage on the planet, with a thing called the feudal system, which is what William Wallace fought against. The king's rights to everyone. They've still got it. In Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney and Sark, they've still got the feudal system. They've got the honorary police force where the wealthy dignitaries, their children are allowed to become police officers with no training. It's unbelievable. You can't believe it. Kids were taken out there. What are they going to do? Swim home? They were put in this care home where they were abused. And those that survived it, they went on to terrible, terrible lives. Some were kicked off the island because they were a nuisance and whatnot. But the suicide rate was through the roof. But they're the ones who survived. They went on about sex parties in the basement, in which kids weren't just raped. They were ritualistically tortured and murdered, ritualistically. And kids have said that there's handcuffs on there where they manicured us to the wall, whipped us, beat us, did witchcrafty things to us. Some were murdered. They witnessed other kids murdered, and their blood was let into a bath. Lenny Harper went out there, and what had happened is the home had filled this basement with sewage. So he did what Tony Robinson on Time Team would have done. He went out there with an archaeologist and an anthropologist and the best dog handler in the world, a man called Martin Grimes. Martin Grimes become very well known because it was his dog that come to the conclusion that Madeleine McCann died in that flat until Kate McCann discredited him. That was nice of her. But anyway, more to the point, whilst they were sifting with their little trowels and spoons through this sewage, bit by bit by bit, they found bloodstains on the wall. They found rusty handcuffs. They found a bath with blood in it. Were these people lying? Of course they weren't. They found skull. The anthropologists saw it. The dog indicated, the cadaver dog can't lie. Contrary to what Kate McCann says, a cadaver dog can't lie. The dog sat down and indicated this is bone. The anthropologist said, yes, it is. It contains collagen. And due to the thickness and its build-up, this is a child between the ages of 7 and 5. A human child, cracked up by a creature that can't lie, a dog. There were many little items of bone were found. Human bone went off to the laboratory. Game over, you'd think. Until the government stepped in, the bone got diverted from the London Forensic Police Laboratory to another one, an independent one. The seal was changed on the bag. The findings come back, it's coconut shell. Lenny Harper was threatened with arrest, and he did a runner. He was threatened again. Lost your home, your job, and your children. Well, we've heard that before, haven't we? I sat down with Lenny Harper and he warned me what I faced. He said, John, they'll shut your bank account down. Sure enough, they did. They shut my bank account down. NatWest shut down my bank account. Why they did it, I don't know. Couldn't pay my mortgage. Nearly lost my home. Nearly went to prison. Nearly lost one of my kids. And Lenny Harper said the tentacles of this will go right to the heart of the British establishment. And at the same time, there was a chief constable. So we could say, oh, it's chief constables that cover it up. There was a chief constable for a county called Wiltshire. In the West Country, the southwest of England, beautiful country. And in Wiltshire, there's is it Chequers is in Wiltshire? Yeah, I think it's Chequers in Wiltshire. And it was the ministerial home of a prime minister called Ted Heath. And many kids said they were taken there, they were abused, they were this, they were that. Many kids, young boys said Ted Heath raped me. Ted Heath, I think there was something like 33 came forwards. Police wouldn't take it any further. But one chief constable did. He said, do you know what? I'm not ignoring this. I'm going to deal with this. The guy called Mike Veal. Mike Veal, the chief constable of Wiltshire, he stood up and he said, we're going to deal with this. Had Ted Heath been alive today, he will be facing trial. Incredible is the information. A prime minister. What happens to Mike Veal? They deposed him. They attacked him. They denigrated him. They ruined him. Are we not seeing a pattern? So why don't we see it? If kids are taken to Ted Heath, is that not grooming? Is that not a rape gang? Of course it is. Are any of them minicab drivers? No, they're not. But again, Lenny Harper threatened into silence, removed. Mike Veal threatened him. We don't hear about them. It's convenient. I'm not knocking anyone else, but it's convenient to stick it to one demographic. It is. I'm not saying they don't do it because they do. And I don't want to bring any anger into the victims of these Muslim grooming gangs. They deserve my heart and they deserve justice, and they will get that from my point of view.
But this issue is so much bigger than just the Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. It's so much bigger.
International. It controls not only domestic but global politics. But Vladimir Putin stood up and he did the same. He spoke out and said, the UK Parliament are for the perverts. Well, where did he get that from? He knew what was going on. He knew what was going on. So this is what we're up against. And I think it's a conversation no one wants. It's a conversation we need to be having. And, I'm going to be in Parliament in 2 weeks' time with a group called Seen and Heard. Seen and Heard are boys that went to Eton. They went to Radley. They went to, to all these posh fee-paying schools. They went there. And they were terribly abused. They thought when they set up a survivor group, a couple of people would come forward. Within a month, 3,000 came forward. 3,000. Who gives any sympathy to the poshos?
Yeah, no one.
No one. Whenever we see these, I held a meeting. I had a list. I wish I brought it with me now. I'll show it to you. I had a list of a name of 52 kids in these care homes in one London borough, and I picked 13 kids of most at risk, boys and girls, right? And I explained how it works, how the whole grooming thing works, right? And I'll explain it to you now. And this is a bit rotten to say it, but it's a fact. Some of those that groom kids are other kids, that. There are other girls in the care homes. They get their friends involved in this. They get their friends to make allegations against their parents, so they get put in the care system. They do. And that's how it works. In the kids' homes, the rapes that go on, they get other boys to rape other boys, to rape other girls. And all of a sudden, they're not a victim in their head. They're now also a rapist. So it causes a conspiracy of silence. So they'll get one boy and he'll find a girl in these care homes, of which there are many. Now, the care homes aren't these big sort of massive, what they used to call cottage homes years ago that had these great big acreage of land with a swimming pool. They're a financial concern now, right? And it's sort of what they call looked after care. It's called, there's a word for it, and it's a loophole. So if you take on the parental responsibility of a child, you have a duty to educate them to a standard, right? And the kids' homes have the same. So Ofsted intervene. So kids' homes that are government run have Ofsted regulation. But these other ones, you could buy them from the Dalton's Weekly. These kids' homes, You set one up, right? You can buy one. They're not governed by Ofsted. So they get that gap, usually the 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, right? And the kids get put in there and they're predating them straight away. Sometimes the staff are involved. They definitely turn a blind eye to this. Well, without a doubt, they turn a blind eye to this. But they get paid. Usually they have between 5 to 10 kids in there. They're small, an old Victorian building. They'll get £2,000 per week per child. You're talking 40 to 50K a week. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, a month. Sorry, that's £500,000, in rudimentary mathematics. For doing what? Doing F all. Social services provide the intermediary. And every time a kid goes missing, which is usually a Thursday night, they come back on a Tuesday, they get recorded in the occurrence book. It gets logged down. So there's a tangible record there. And the staff watch these girls and boys leave the homes, and on the CCTV camera, there'll be a car. Even when I approached them, they gave me the number plate of the cars. And we said we got the phone numbers because the men sometimes ring up. And, I had like 10 in 10 minutes, 52 in 3 days. I think a couple of them might have been Muslim names, but the others weren't. Plenty of Jamaican names on there, plenty of Englishy names on there. But anyway, they would ring up and they had them. And the kid then gets marked down as a missing person. But they're a regular missing person. So they come back. And when they come back, are they ever debriefed? No. The police have a duty of care via their missing persons unit to investigate it. They don't. They sit in an office and shine a seat with their ass. That's what they do. They never visit these places and never, in my working experience, ever debrief these kids. Never. The information is sometimes that kids are being picked up. So maybe the missing person aren't really a proactive investigative unit, but the police has got them. They've got vice units, right? And how many times did the vice units investigate these? Never. Not once did they ever do it. Never. And their excuse was that these aren't kids that have been sex exploited for money, but these are kids that have been done within the family court setting because they're in an environment that's got the governance subject to the Child Protection Act, the Children's Act. That's the remit of the police's Child Protection Unit. And the police's Child Protection Unit, so there's nothing to do with this. These are being pimped up, not by the family, but by someone else. So they did nothing. So all they did was bounce it between each other. And when I was on these Child Protection Unit, I'm going to say something very controversial, and I'm going to upset police officers, but you know what, Nick? I don't care. I'm beyond worrying about that. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, as the adage goes. These Child Protection Units were mainly policed by women who were either part-time or going to or returning from maternity leave. And on the majority of cases, they didn't want to go and investigate these because some of these kids had scabies and they didn't want to take it home to their little darlings in their little leafy middle-class suburbs. So failings are on 3 levels. Incompetence, massive incompetence. Social workers that weren't people with a lot of experience. They were from Commonwealth countries such as South Africa, Trinidad, and places Australia and New Zealand, and they were usually young women in their early 20s, were just bumming around with a degree in social care and getting work in the inner cities, and they weren't married. They had no real interest. And they were snobby anyway, a lot of them. They're a bit weird. A lot of them weren't ethnically mixed or diverse, So they did soddle. The coppers, the majority of the women wanted to go home, and that was the truth, right? So incompetence, laziness, without a doubt laziness. And on top of that, corruption, the final. I held a meeting, and I was in the Child Protection Unit for the London Borough of Haringey. Now, Haringey have officially said they were unaware of my claims. They can piss off their liars. And I will call out the senior social worker by name if I have to at a public inquiry. I know her name. So if they ever want to take any further, well, we'll take it further. Right? I held a meeting and I was a good copper. I was naturally born to do the job. It was just something I found easy and I was good at it. And I brought together I wouldn't just stick to my environment, I spread it out. So I wouldn't just stick to main kids charities, of which there are two. One of the charities attended, right? And they sent their head for safeguarding for kids in this situation. And she got sent down there. But an abhorrent woman. And again, I did mention her to Justice J for I mentioned her name. Nothing's been done about this woman, Anyway, she was there. I extended the invite to the Metropolitan Police's Vice Unit, who refused to attend. I extended it to all neighbouring child protection police units. None attended. The missing persons unit, they did attend, and they did admit they did nothing. So bless them, and I thank them for doing that. And there was also NGOs, non-government organisations, who attended. I read out the list of 50 kids and my proposal of how I could deal with this, and it's very straightforward how you deal with it, very straightforward. There's a bit of legislation in the Children's Act that said you can't take a kid out of care if you've not got any lawful authority at an unreasonable hour. So any kid that is from a kid's home that's out with someone, they're nickable. And back then you could nick that person, seize items and search their homes. So straight away you nick them. You can seize the phone. You can seize the phone of the little girl or boy, and you've got continuity straight away. You've got an audit trail. Job done. Piece of cake, right? No surveillance, nothing. That's how you solve it in a nutshell. I did a case about a week before this meeting. Totally 100% successful. No one got hurt. Identified a pimp who was from Albania and would only been in the country something like 2 months, and he had his immigration IND papers. So, thank you, England, for looking after me, And then I held this meeting and said, look, this is what I've got. The head of this two major charities. So in your head, you're thinking two kids' charities. One in particular, I'm not going to name them. Legally, I won't name them. But she stood up and said, you're treading on toes. We know about this. We're dealing with it. You're not to take it any further. A total load of bullshit. She covered it up, right? Covered it up. Then the head of Haringey Child Protection stood up and said, what have you done, John? You really effed us up. I said, but you know about these kids? She went, yeah, we know about them. But whilst they're in care, they're no problem. So they basically do that. They go into these looked after placements. They don't hear from the kids again, right? They had to then put in child protection orders, which they didn't want to do because it's a court case, it's hearings and all that. They were happy. They shut the door. Like I said, when I was with LBC, they do that. They do that. Right? And that's what they want. Right. And they threaten me. Shut your mouth. You can't be doing this. What the effing hell are you doing it? Right. And this is what we get all the time. We get the same pattern all the time, constantly. We get this failing. And it's on a very, very local level most of the time. The higher up stuff is the corruption element. The lower stuff down is base level malfeasance and laziness. And that's how we protect it. But, if we want to protect children, do you know what we do, Nick? Right? The one factor that causes a child 30%, what am I on about, Johnny Wedger? 30 times more likely in the home to be sexually abused. And I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm not doing that to you. Just, do you have any idea what it is?
Not having a biological father at home.
Bang on. Presence of a step parent. 100%. We've got to stop this baby mother, baby father culture. We got to stop it. We sit down, we're blaming grooming gangs. No. 80% of it, if we're going to blame anyone for failing kids, we blame mothers. We don't have marches against mothers, do we? No. Women, the lioness must protect her cubs. Men, what sort of a man are you if you leave your child to be abused? You're not a man. You're a maggot. You don't do it. That's where we start. And people don't want to hear that because they've got guilt. They got guilty conscience.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can blame the bogeyman. We can blame it. The Kashmiri cab drivers, they're the bogeyman here.
No, nobody wants to take personal responsibility.
No, they don't.
John, I think that's a great place to end. I think me and you need more conversations over the next few months. I could speak to you for hours and hours and hours. Thank you so much for blowing my mind, and I've been involved in this in 2 decades, and it's not very often I say to people, "You've given me a lesson there," but you definitely have given me.
You're on the ball. You're on the ball, Nick. You know the score. You know the score. You know, without a doubt. There's many. I'm shocked. I'm shocked at their ignorance. I am, and I don't want to come across dictatorial, but I've got past the point of worrying what people think. Do you know what I mean? In order for the triumph of evil, it takes but for good men to do nothing.
And we've got a society now where men tend to do nothing.
They do nothing. They do nothing.
Thank you so much for today.
My pleasure.
Let's do this again soon. And thank you so much.
God bless you, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.